It is my pleasure to be able to lead today a session titled Inside Amory's Brain Live. For those of you who may be new to RMI, and I know that at my tables in the last couple of days, I think that our longest employee at my table was 3.5 years. You may not know that about a year ago, with the help of our crack social and web teams, we launched a website titled Inside Amory's Brain, which actually Amory and I cooked up on a phone call together about what we should call this website to showcase Amory's thought leadership, which, as you know, goes back to 1976 with his Sentinel paper on the soft energy path, and that's going to be our first question. We also sourced all of the questions today from all of you and the RMI staff, knowing that everybody kind of wants to get a piece of Amory's brain on subject matters. So without further ado, please welcome Amory, and then we'll dive right into questions. So the first question is not from me. I titled it this. It's actually from Amory because he wanted to talk a little bit about this. But as you know, his paper, his 1976 paper, was really a seminal moment in terms of discussing the energy transition and redefining what it is. So the first question, Amory, I'm hoping that you can answer is, what made it possible? What were the factors that helped you reframe the energy debate back in 1976?
First of all, I didn't know too much. This is a great advantage. There's an old story, maybe 13 centuries ago in China, a Zen master who is now called Nanin in Japanese was visited by, the story varies, either an imperious official or a university professor who said, "Teach me Zen," or Chan actually, the forerunner of modern Zen. And so Nanin smiled and poured tea and kept pouring, and the tea overflowed and flowed over the tablecloth onto the visitor's robes. And the visitor got quite agitated, said, "Stop, don't you see it's full, no more will go in." So Nanin stopped pouring and said, "Like this cup, you are full of your own ideas and speculations. You've spent the last 20 minutes telling me how much you know about Zen, and yet you want to learn Zen. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" Well, in 76 and a few years before that, there was no place you could go to study energy policy. Energy policy was what emerged de facto from the decisions of engineers, lawyers, and accountants in the energy companies, the energy supply companies. And we didn't have the Energy and Resources group at Berkeley. We didn't have the Princeton group and so on. You just couldn't study this stuff. So I had the advantage of not knowing too much about what the energy problem is and what we should do about it. And it seemed to me as I dug into it that we had it backwards and upside down and inside out. We were looking for where to get more energy, more from any source at any scale at any price, rather than what do we want the energy for? What is the service we're trying to deliver, the so-called end-use service, like hot showers and cold beer? Or since I was living in England at the time, cold showers and warm beer. And for each of those services we want, how much energy, of what quality or kind, at what scale, from what source would do the job in the cheapest way. This later came to be called the end-use least cost approach, and it turned out to be very powerful. So starting from that opposite view of what the problem is, the answer became self-evident. You would use energy much more efficiently or productively. You'd get it from what I called soft technologies, that is renewable, benign, widely available sources, the right size and quality for the job. And you'd have some transitional, efficiently used fossil fuels, but they would get squeezed out from both sides. This turned out to be a very controversial idea, which I spent a year defending, but I was young, tenacious, scrappy, not yet skilled in Aikido, I guess. And it worked out fine. After a year of furious debate, 36 tedious responses to fatuous critiques in a 10-centimeter congressional hearing record of fine print, paperweight, the dust kind of settled, and the, I think, chief economist of Atlantic Richfield kind of brought an end to that phase by saying, I, for one, don't care if Lovins is only half right. That would be better performance than I've seen from the rest of them. And then a lot of the companies that have been furiously criticizing our work started hiring us to help them do it, and been busy ever since. So the advantage of not knowing too much. It's like we were able to build our house and office and banana farm that hatched RMI the first 18 years because we didn't know what we were trying to do was impossible. That made it possible.
Speaking of bananas, I want to go back to one slide. He brought one, of course.
Well, this isn't a good one. This is a Cavendish.
A little inside baseball here.
Yellow.
So first of all, huge kudos to Alberto Quadra here in the front, our senior creative director, who commissioned this illustration of Amory. And in the editing process, besides being an energy expert, he's also an orangutan expert. And we actually had the banana the wrong way. They actually eat bananas from the bottom, which is something that you learn something new every day. So we had to change the illustration. So just a little bit of banana tail from Amory, which I know that he's very proud to share. But we had to correct the sketch. I was not an orangutan expert, nor was Alberto. Okay, so the first question from the staff comes from Kate Mark, who is the Systems and Process Training Lead, Program Services and Strategic Operations. Considering your perspective of applied hope, I'm curious whether your thinking has been shaped by impactful current events, which is an urgency to put a moratorium on AI advancement. In other words, does your worldview evolve over decades of time or hold firm regardless of the vicissitudes of the human experience? If it shifts, can you share more with us on how that change looks? We also did slides because at RMI we like to ask multiple questions at once. So, Amory.
Yeah, well, I'm only 75, so this is, of course, a work in progress. But, my parents made it to 97, so with luck I might be around to plague the wicked for some time yet. Scrooge said, the wicked flee where no man pursueth, but they make better time when someone is after them. Let's see, so the principles hold firm, the learnings improve, and the worldview certainly evolves because everything changes. Goto Roshi, a Zen abbot, said, infinite gratitude for all things past, infinite service to all things present, infinite responsibility to all things future. That's a good way to live, I think. I worry about AI. I worry about, I don't worry actually, that's a futile activity. I try to improve things. But I am concerned about a number of existential threats. Climate is one, nuclear proliferation is another, political, social instability is another, pandemic disease is another. By the way, they all have common solutions. At least the first three you can pretty well resolve by doing the same things, largely in energy. So that's what I've been working on. And the AI threat is similar to a lot of others we've seen where cleverness outruns wisdom. And we build something and it gets loose and does a variety of good and bad things because we didn't really think about how to regulate it and what rules to build into it. So, I keep evolving, and I hope to continue to keep evolving.
Can you think, of course I'm going to ad-lib a little bit here because I do that. Can you think of one example in your 75 years where your worldview has shifted?
Yeah, a couple. It's only 15, 20 years ago that I was one of the people saying that battery cars, as a Dutch colleague put it, are cars for carrying mainly batteries, but not very far and not very fast, or else they'd have to carry even more batteries. Well, but then the makers of this sort of device started paying enormous premiums for more energy-dense batteries so the battery would last longer. And then that drove fancy lithium chemistries, and then folks like J.B. Straubel said, gee, if we put tens of thousands of these together in a car, it would be a pretty good car. And then they made a bunch, and the batteries got really cheap, and now they're revolutionizing the power business. Who would have thought this would flow from a smartphone? There are all these non-adjacent technology interactions. And of course I was wrong about the battery cars, and now we're finding the same logic exactly play out in electric planes. EPs evolving in parallel with EVs, both strongly reinforcing each other, and only the EPs are moving faster. We just cut a decade or two off the development of battery and fuel cell and super efficient planes, and they're coming right at us in this decade. So I think that's probably a good example, but there are others. I was wrong about some aspects of hydrogen, and I think corrected those, and now a lot of other people are wrong about a lot of other things about hydrogen.
Thanks for that, Amory. The next question is from Zach Subin, who's actually at my table this morning, who's a senior associate on the UA program and urban transformation teams. Renewables are likely to get cheaper and cheaper, and Kingsmill likes to remind us we are only consuming 1/10,000th of the energy the sun gives us every day. Do we still need to focus on efficiency, or is it a distraction from getting on with the energy transition?
Well, it's at least half of the energy transition. It's not a distraction. Efficient end use is responsible for half of the decarbonization the last 20 years. IPCC, which like most others severely understates what you can do with efficiency, thinks it could be 40 to 70% of future decarbonization. And in the US, for example, since 1975, the amount of energy we have cumulatively saved is 27 times the increase in renewables, which have tripled. It's great that they've tripled, but they're completely left in the dust by efficiency, which gets almost none of the headlines. The headline ratio is the obverse, the opposite. It was pretty clear why. Not only is there a much more organized industry on the supply side than the efficiency side, but energy, well, the renewable supply is visible on the rooftop and the skyline, but energy is invisible. The energy you don't use is almost unimaginable. And probably we should be marketing not negawatts, which are ineffably abstract, but the side benefits. So that's one of the main reasons to continue a strong focus on efficiency, and indeed the so-called Sunderberg declaration done in Sunderberg, Denmark by the International Energy Agency and a whole bunch of countries is to at least double the rate of efficiency gains in aggregate from roughly 2% a year in primary terms to about 4.5% a year. So instead of a range of 1 or 2% a year in forecasts, IEA is now saying 2.5 to 4.5, I think. And it can go faster than that. So it turns out that the side benefits of energy efficiency are typically worth 1 order of magnitude and sometimes 2 orders of magnitude more in economic value than the avoided energy cost. So people are, typical number would be about 15-20% more productive in an efficient green office. There are 2,500 peer-reviewed papers showing better clinical outcomes in efficient green healthcare facilities. So people hurt less, heal faster, come back less, fewer mistakes, better staff retention, everything gets better. Better throughput and quality in industrial production if you're efficient at it, and so on. Well, we ought to be marketing those attributes, and in fact, we often find our clients, when we let them experience an efficient office, say, we got to have this. It would be vital to our competitive advantage. and then we say, oh, by the way, you'll get your investment back in 6 months. They say, you're going to make money on this too? Oh, that's just icing on the cake. You didn't need that to make the sale. Also, of course, renewables have side effects like everything else. They may use materials. If you put them on the ground, they may use land, although often you can share that. The side effects are much smaller and more manageable than commonly represented by those who would like you to think otherwise. But they're not zero. And efficiency also makes the supply transition much faster, easier, and cheaper because you need so much less of it. So if, let's see, if we had, well, no, I'll skip the example, it gets too complicated.
Thank you for that, Amory. The next question comes from Suki, who's on our buildings team, a senior principal. Given the current political climate in the US and globally, can you talk about the relevance and importance of RMI as a nonpartisan organization and how we can navigate in highly political waters?
The water's not political. And the fish doesn't know it's in the water anyway, but there's things swimming around there that do have views. And let me tell you a little story. Every decade or so, I go talk to what's called Club 20, which is the extractive industries consortium of the Western Slope in Colorado and thereabouts. And they're probably 99% conservative Republicans. I didn't talk about climate as they expected. Didn't mention climate. I just talked about how they can make more money at less risk and provide better service at lower cost by doing different things. And as I was leaving, I thought it went reasonably well. They were surprised and interested. This guy comes running up to me and says, could I ask you a question? Yes, sir. He says, I'm a lifelong conservative Republican, and I think climate change is a hoax and Al Gore is a fraud, but let me see if I got this right. I think what I heard you say is that we ought to do the same things anyway, as if we believed in climate change, just to increase our profits and strengthen national security. Did I get that right? Bingo. Yes, sir, you got it exactly. Now, notice I did not go on to say, and you really ought to go do your homework about climate science. Why should I do that? We have a win. We agree about what ought to be done. Maybe we'd even end up doing some of it together. We don't need to agree about why. Focus on outcomes, not motives, and you will find the ideological disputes melt away. And it's no accident that almost all of the renewable supply in the country is in red states and red congressional districts, especially things like wind power. Actually, it's Chuck Grassley, the Republican senator from Iowa, who gave a lovely speech a couple of years ago to a conservative group where he said, you know, a lot of folks in Washington talk about how we need all of the above, but then when you look closer, you find they're in favor of none of the above and all of the below. The stuff you dig up.
That's really an excellent way to put it. The next question comes from Ali Gorin, a manager on carbon-free electricity. As our window of time to stay on a 1.5C pathway narrows and traditional decarbonization models, example, deploying more wind and solar, take too long to deploy at the needed speed and scale, what radical technologies or business models do you envision emerging to disrupt the electricity, buildings, or mobility sectors?
Well, it's a long list, but the top of my list would be integrative design for radical energy efficiency. Notice this is not a technology, and therefore it drops out of most taxonomies of what options we have. And it's not a policy either. It's a way of choosing, combining, timing, and sequencing technologies. It's how you put the pieces together. And you're probably familiar with our passive solar banana farm at the building in which RMI hatched its first 18 years. 80 banana crops so far, with outdoor temperatures down to minus 44°C, no heating system, cheaper to build that way 40 years ago, even cheaper now. Or my carbon fiber electric car, the ultralighting in that is free because it's paid for by simpler manufacturing and fewer batteries. And the fewer batteries means, by the way, fewer battery minerals, less supply chain constraint, faster recharging, less recharging infrastructure and investment. It addresses all the pain points that your mobility program focuses on.
The next question comes from Drew Vasey, who's the senior associate on the U.S. program, and apologize if my pronunciations are off. What's something you wished you had known much earlier about energy technology, energy economics, energy politics, etc.?
Well, I wish I had gained earlier a greater respect for what creatively used markets can do if you use them to do what they do best, allocating scarce resources, and don't try to use them for stuff they're not meant to do and cannot do, like substitute for ethics, faith, or politics. So we did develop in the 80s a bunch of ways, probably 24 or so, for making markets in saved resources. A lot of that work is still valid and worth revisiting. And of course it applies not just to energy, but to water and minerals and a lot of other things. And I wish I had started earlier to systematize and spread integrative design. I should mention integrative design is one of about a dozen overlooked climate mitigations. And there are also 10 or so main flaws or defects in the standard integrated assessment models and forecasting models that underlie climate policy in the US and worldwide. I was just having breakfast with Kingsmill Bond and Sam Butler-Schloss about what we can do to shine some light on those flaws and ask what would the models say if they were done properly. And I think we would find that actually climate protection is a whole lot easier than we thought. You need to be careful how you say that so you don't sound Panglossian. But here's the big picture. The climate science models are understandably, knowing what fire they will come under, conservative in understating the speed and the runaway potential of climate change. But much less noticed is that the climate choice and consequence models used to set policy are at least equally conservative in understating what you can do to stop or reverse climate change. And if you offset those two biases, then what Jeremy Grantham calls the race of our lives, the race for our lives really, is very much in play, and despair and complacency are equally unwarranted.